Harold Briggs had survived 41 years of marriage, 2 recessions, a triple bypass, and the Great Casserole Incident of 2003. But nothing in his 74 years on Earth had prepared him for the sight of his daughter-in-law Melissa, standing at his brand-new front door with a rolling suitcase in each hand and her mother, Diane, parked behind her like a second piece of luggage. It was supposed to be the happiest afternoon of Harold's life. After 18 months of saving, planning and negotiating with contractors who seemed constitutionally opposed to finishing anything on time, he and his wife, Ruth, had finally moved into their dream home, a modest but beautiful 3-bedroom ranch on Clover Lane. The housewarming had started beautifully. Neighbors brought casseroles. His son, Daniel, had arrived early to help set up the folding tables. The grandchildren were chasing each other around the backyard. Everything smelled like fresh paint and possibility. And then the doorbell rang. Harold opened it himself, still wearing the apron Ruth had bought him as a joke, the one that said Grill Sergeant. He expected it to be Pastor Wendell from the church down the road, who had promised to stop by with his wife. Instead, he found Melissa, Daniel's wife of 6 years, flanked by Diane, a woman Harold had always privately described as a storm system shaped like a person, both of them smiling in a way that made his left eye twitch. "Harold," Melissa said brightly, stepping forward without waiting for an invitation. "Where should we put our things?" He blinked. "Your things." Diane wheeled her suitcase over the threshold with the confidence of someone who had already measured the closet space. "Daniel said it would be fine. He told us last week. The guest room," she craned her neck, surveying the entryway. "Oh, this is nice. Smaller than I imagined, but nice." Harold stood very still for a moment, the kind of stillness that comes not from calm, but from the brain working too hard to send signals to the rest of the body. He was dimly aware of the party continuing behind him, laughter from the kitchen, the clink of glasses, the distant squeal of his granddaughter finding the garden hose. "Daniel said yes to what exactly?" he asked, keeping his voice even. Melissa set down her bag and looked at him with that particular expression she reserved for moments when she believed she was being perfectly reasonable and everyone else was simply slow. "To us staying here, while our house is being renovated. We talked about it at dinner last month, and Daniel said you two had plenty of room and it would only be for a few weeks." She paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, "Diane's lease ran out last Tuesday, so she'll be with us too." It just made sense to consolidate. Harold heard a sound from deeper in the house. Ruth had appeared in the hallway, drawn by some marital sixth sense that had developed over 4 decades, the ability to detect her husband's blood pressure rising from 3 rooms away. She looked at the suitcases. She looked at Melissa. She looked at Diane. Then she looked at Harold with eyes that said, very clearly, "I am going to need you to handle this." "Why don't I go find Daniel?" Harold said pleasantly. He located his son in the backyard, standing near the grill with a plate of chips and the vaguely guilty expression of a man who has been hopping a problem will solve itself. Daniel was 41 years old, a project manager by trade, and somehow completely incapable of managing the project of saying no to his wife. "Walk with me," Harold said. They stepped away from the crowd, past the rose bushes Ruth had transplanted from the old house to the far corner of the yard near the fence. Harold crossed his arms. Daniel ate a chip. "Your wife," Harold said, "is currently in my new house with 2 suitcases and her mother." Daniel chewed. "Yeah, I was going to mention that." "When?" "Soon." Harold exhaled slowly through his nose. He had a great deal of practice with this particular exhale. He had deployed it during Daniel's teenage years, during the car incident of 1999, during various holiday disasters, and during every single interaction with Diane going back to the rehearsal dinner. "Daniel, this is our housewarming. Your mother and I have lived in this house for 11 days. 11 days. We have not yet decided where to put the second lamp." "I know, Dad. Melissa she said it would be nice for the family to be together, and the renovation is going to take 8 weeks, and Diane's situation with the apartment." "Diane's situation," Harold repeated, "is not my situation." Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I told Melissa I'd ask you." "And did you?" A very long pause. "I told her I would." Harold looked at his son for a long moment. This man he had raised, coached through Little League, helped move 6 times, lent money to twice and forgiven 3 times, and felt the complicated love of a parent who sees their child clearly and loves them anyway. But love, Harold had learned, did not require a man to give away his guest room on the day of his housewarming. He went back inside. Ruth had positioned herself with remarkable tactical precision near the kitchen island, which gave her sightlines to the front hallway, the living room, and the back door. She had also, Harold noticed, placed a cup of tea in front of Melissa and absolutely nothing in front of Diane, which was either an oversight or a declaration of war. With Ruth, it was never entirely clear. Harold sat down across from Melissa. Diane hovered nearby, inspecting the kitchen cabinets with the air of an estate agent. "Melissa," Harold began, in the tone he used when he wanted to be kind and firm simultaneously, "I understand there's been some confusion about what Daniel may or may not have said, but I want to be very straightforward with you because I've always believed that's the respectful way to handle things in a family." He folded his hands on the counter. "This is your mother-in-law's and my home. We have just moved in. We have not agreed to house guests, and certainly not to extended house guests, and I need you to understand that Ruth and I are not in a position to offer that right now. Not today, and not for the foreseeable future." Melissa stared at him. "But Daniel." "Daniel," Harold said gently, but without any opening for debate, "did not have the authority to make that offer. This is not his home, it is ours." He looked up as Daniel appeared in the doorway, chastened and chipless. "And I believe your husband has something he'd like to say to you." The silence in the kitchen was the kind that has weight. Harold could hear the party carrying on outside, oblivious. Someone was laughing at something. The grandchildren had found the garden hose again. Daniel sat down next to his wife. To his credit, he did not hedge. "I should have talked to my parents before I said anything to you. I didn't, and I was wrong. We can't stay here." He took her hand. "We'll figure something out." Diane, who had been examining a cabinet hinge with great concentration, chose this moment to speak. "I just want to say that I think it's very telling that a father wouldn't open his home to his own family in a time of—" "Diane," Ruth's voice was not loud. "It never needed to be. I have known you for 9 years. I have been gracious at every holiday, every birthday, every event that required us to be in the same room. Today is my housewarming. If you have nothing kind to say about it, I'd ask that you enjoy the cheese board and save the commentary for another occasion." Diane closed her mouth. It was, Harold reflected later, the first time he had ever seen it happen. The suitcases were loaded back into Melissa's car within the hour. There were some tears from Melissa, not Diane, who departed with the rigid dignity of someone who considers retreat a tactical maneuver. Daniel hugged Harold at the door and said quietly, "Thanks for handling that, Dad." Harold patted his shoulder and didn't say the 9 or 10 things that occurred to him, because that was what good fathers did. The party resumed. The neighbors brought out a second bottle of wine. Ruth danced briefly to something on the radio with their granddaughter, who was 6 and had no sense of rhythm and didn't care. Pastor Wendell arrived and admired the rose bushes. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the house was quiet in that new, slightly unfamiliar way of a home still learning its owners, Harold stood in the kitchen and washed the last of the glasses by hand. Ruth appeared beside him, dried them without being asked, and after a while said, "You know they're going to tell that story for years." The time Harold turned away his son's family at the door. "I know," Harold said. "Does that bother you?" He thought about it seriously, the way he tried to think about most things seriously now that he was old enough to know the difference between a question worth dismissing and one worth answering. "No," he said finally, "because the other story, the one where we spend our first month in our own home sleeping down the hall from Diane while she audits our cabinet hinges, that one bothers me considerably more." Ruth laughed. It was the best sound in the house. Better than the new dishwasher, better than the central air, better than the wind through the back porch screen that Harold had decided, in 11 days, was his favorite thing about the place. He handed her the last glass. "Happy housewarming," he said. She clinked it against his. Happy housewarming, grill sergeant. Outside, Clover Lane was quiet. The roses were dark shapes in the yard. Somewhere down the street, a sprinkler ran. Harold Briggs, 74 years old, stood in his own kitchen in his own home and felt, with great, uncomplicated certainty, exactly where he was supposed to be.